Marcus had served the royal family for 12 years. Every morning he stood at attention outside the king's chambers, his uniform perfectly pressed and his sword polished to shine. The other guards respected him. The servants smiled when they saw him. Even the royal children would wave as they passed by on their way to lessons, but Marcus carried a secret that could change everything. Deep in the servants' quarters lived Elena, a young woman who worked in the palace kitchens. She had arrived 3 years ago when her village faced terrible floods. The queen, known for her kindness, had offered shelter to many displaced families. Elena was grateful for the work, even though it meant long days preparing meals for hundreds of people. Marcus first noticed Elena during the harvest festival. She was carrying a heavy tray of fresh bread to the great hall when she stumbled on the stone steps. Without thinking, Marcus rushed to help her. Their eyes met for just a moment, but something passed between them that neither could ignore. From that day forward, Marcus found excuses to walk past the kitchens. Elena began taking slightly longer routes through the corridors where Marcus stood guard. They exchanged small smiles and brief conversations about the weather or palace news. Other servants began to notice these innocent interactions. "The royal guard seems quite interested in our Elena," whispered Margaret, the head cook, to her assistants one afternoon. The kitchen staff giggled, but they kept Elena's secret. They had grown fond of the hard-working girl who never complained and always helped others when needed. Marcus knew the rules. Royal guards were forbidden from marrying without the king's permission. This law existed to ensure complete loyalty to the crown. Guards were expected to dedicate their lives entirely to protecting the royal family. Personal attachments could create conflicts of interest or distractions during critical moments. But love doesn't follow rules or royal decrees. During winter evenings, when his duties were lighter, Marcus would meet Elena in the palace gardens. They walked among the bare rose bushes and frozen fountains, talking about their dreams and fears. Elena shared stories of her childhood in the countryside, where she helped her father tend sheep and learned to bake bread from her grandmother. Marcus told her about his military training and his pride in serving the kingdom. "Do you ever think about a different life?" Elena asked one snowy evening as they sat on a stone bench near the chapel. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Every day since I met you," he finally admitted. The palace operated on routine and tradition. Every ceremony, every meal, every changing of the guard happened according to customs that had existed for centuries. The staff knew their places and their duties. Disruption was rare and usually unwelcome. But spring brought changes that no one anticipated. Elena discovered she was expecting a child. The news filled her with both joy and terror. In those days, unmarried mothers faced shame and often lost their positions. Elena confided only in Margaret, who had become like a mother to her. "You must tell Marcus immediately," Margaret advised, her weathered hands gentle as she comforted the frightened girl. "He's an honorable man. He'll do what's right." When Elena shared her news with Marcus, he didn't hesitate. "We'll be married," he said firmly. "I'll request an audience with the king tomorrow." Elena felt relief wash over her, but she also worried. "What if he says no? What if you lose your position?" Marcus took her hands in his. "Then we'll find another way to build our life together. I won't abandon you or our child." That night, Marcus barely slept. He spent hours polishing his armor and rehearsing what he would say to the king. He had served faithfully for over a decade. He had proven his loyalty in times of conflict and peace. Surely that counted for something. The next morning, Marcus approached the captain of the guard, Sir Richard, who had been his mentor since his early days at the palace. Sir Richard was known for his fairness and his genuine care for the men under his command. "Sir, I need to request a private audience with His Majesty," Marcus said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Sir Richard studied the young guard's face. He had noticed Marcus's distraction in recent weeks, though the man's duties had never suffered. "This is about the kitchen maid, isn't it?" Marcus nodded, knowing there was no point in denying what others had already observed. "Marcus, you know the law. Royal guards cannot marry without permission, and that permission is rarely granted." Sir Richard's tone was gentle but serious. "I understand, sir, but I must try. It's the honorable thing to do." Sir Richard sighed deeply. He had seen other good men face this same dilemma over the years. Some had chosen duty over love and spent their lives regretting it. Others had left their positions to marry, only to struggle with poverty and resentment. "I'll arrange the audience," Sir Richard finally agreed. "But prepare yourself for disappointment, son. The king values tradition above all else." Word of Marcus's request began to spread through the palace like ripples in a pond. The servants whispered among themselves during their breaks. The guards speculated about what would happen to their colleague. Even some of the nobles had heard rumors about the royal guard who wanted to marry a kitchen maid. The palace, which had seemed so stable and predictable just weeks before, suddenly felt charged with anticipation and uncertainty. King Alexander was reviewing trade agreements in his private study when Sir Richard knocked on the heavy wooden door. The king looked up from the documents spread across his mahogany desk, his reading glasses perched on his nose. "Your Majesty, Royal Guard Marcus requests an audience. The matter is personal and urgent." The king set down his quill and removed his glasses. He had ruled for 23 years and prided himself on knowing his staff well. Marcus was one of his most trusted guards, a man who had never caused problems or requested favors. "Send him in." Marcus entered the study with measured steps, his polished boots silent on the thick carpet. He stopped at the appropriate distance from the king's desk and bowed deeply. His heart pounded so loudly he worried the king might hear it. "You may speak freely, Marcus. Sir Richard tells me this is a personal matter." Taking a deep breath, Marcus began the speech he had practiced all night. "Your Majesty, I have served your family faithfully for 12 years. I have never asked for special treatment or shown favoritism to any cause above my duty to the crown." The king nodded, encouraging him to continue. "I come before you today to request permission to marry Elena Hartwell, who serves in the palace kitchens. I know this breaks with tradition, but I believe my service record demonstrates that my loyalty to your family remains absolute." King Alexander leaned back in his leather chair. He had expected this conversation eventually. Palace romances were nothing new, though guards rarely had the courage to make formal requests for marriage. "Tell me about this young woman," the king said, his tone neutral. "Elena came to the palace 3 years ago when her village was flooded. She works harder than anyone in the kitchens and has never caused trouble. She's kind to everyone, from the youngest page to the oldest butler. She would make a worthy wife and mother." The word mother hung in the air. King Alexander was no fool. He understood the urgency behind this request. "I see." The king stood and walked to the tall windows overlooking the courtyard. He watched his guards conducting their morning drills, their movements precise and disciplined. "You understand that marriage would change your priorities. A wife and child create divided loyalties. With respect, Your Majesty, I believe they would strengthen my resolve to protect this kingdom. I would have even more reason to ensure its safety and prosperity." The king turned back to Marcus. "The law exists for good reasons. Past kings learned that married guards sometimes chose family over duty in critical moments." Marcus felt his hopes sinking, but he pressed on. "Then let me prove otherwise, Your Majesty. Grant me this permission, and I will show you that love can make a man more dedicated, not less." King Alexander returned to his desk and studied Marcus's face. The guard's eyes showed determination mixed with desperation. This was clearly not a casual request born of fleeting attraction. "I will consider your petition. You are dismissed." Marcus bowed again and left the study, uncertain whether he should feel hopeful or defeated. He had stated his case as best he could. Now the decision rested with the king. That afternoon, King Alexander summoned his closest advisors to discuss the unprecedented request. Lord William, the king's brother and chief counselor, strongly opposed granting permission. "If you allow this marriage, you'll set a dangerous precedent. Every guard will expect the same privilege. Our security could be compromised by men more concerned with their families than their duties." But the queen, who had been listening quietly from her seat by the fireplace, offered a different perspective. "Alexander, I've watched Marcus serve our family. He's never shown poor judgment or wavering loyalty. Perhaps it's time to trust that good character rather than fear what might happen." "You've always been too soft-hearted, my dear," Lord William replied. "Kindness is admirable, but ruling requires difficult decisions." Queen Isabella rose gracefully and moved to stand beside her husband. "It also requires recognizing when old rules no longer serve their purpose. Times change, William. Perhaps our policies should change with them." The king valued both perspectives. His brother's caution had saved the kingdom from many poor decisions over the years. But his wife's compassion had earned the people's love and loyalty in ways that strict rules never could. "What do we know about this, Elena?" the Queen asked. Sir Richard, who had remained silent during the debate, cleared his throat. "If I may, Your Majesty, I took the liberty of making some inquiries. The kitchen staff speaks highly of her character. She's helped care for 6 servants without being asked. During last winter's food shortages, she volunteered to reduce her own rations so others could eat. Margaret, the head cook, says she's never seen anyone work harder or complain less." The Queen smiled. "She sounds like exactly the kind of person we want in our palace family." Lord William shook his head. "Character aside, the precedent remains dangerous. What happens when other guards make similar requests? What happens when those requests are denied? We could face resentment and divided loyalties throughout our security forces." The debate continued for hours. Arguments flew back and forth about tradition versus progress, security concerns versus human compassion, and the practical implications of changing long-established policies. Meanwhile, Elena waited anxiously in the kitchen. Margaret had told her about Marcus's audience with the king, but no one knew what decision would be reached. Elena continued her work, kneading bread and chopping vegetables, but her mind was elsewhere. "Stop worrying so much," Margaret said gently as she watched Elena's distracted movements. "Whatever happens, we'll find a way to help you." The other kitchen maids gathered around Elena, offering their support and encouragement. They had all grown fond of the young woman who had faced hardship with such grace. Several offered to help care for the baby when it arrived, regardless of Elena's marital status. "You're not alone in this," said Sarah, one of the older maids. "We're your family here." Elena felt tears of gratitude fill her eyes. She had lost so much when the floods destroyed her village, but she had gained something precious here at the palace. People who truly cared about her welfare. As evening approached, Marcus finished his guard duties but learned nothing about the king's decision. The suspense was almost unbearable. He had gambled everything on this request. If denied, he would have to choose between his career and his conscience. That night, both Marcus and Elena lay awake, staring at their respective ceilings and wondering what the morning would bring. The entire palace seemed to hold its breath, waiting for news that would affect far more people than just 2 young lovers. 3 days passed without word from the king. Marcus performed his duties with the same precision as always, but everyone could see the strain on his face. Elena moved through the kitchen like a ghost, mechanically completing her tasks while her thoughts remained elsewhere. On the 4th morning, Sir Richard approached Marcus during the changing of the guard. "His Majesty requests your presence in the throne room at noon." Marcus felt his stomach drop. The throne room was used for formal proceedings and official announcements. This didn't sound like good news. Word spread quickly through the palace corridors. By mid-morning, everyone from the stable boys to the ladies-in-waiting knew that Marcus would receive the king's decision in just hours. The anticipation was almost unbearable. Elena couldn't concentrate on her work at all. She dropped a bowl of eggs, sending shells and yolk across the stone floor. Her hands shook as she tried to clean up the mess. "Go to your room and rest," Margaret ordered kindly. "We'll manage without you for a few hours." At exactly noon, Marcus stood before the ornate throne where King Alexander sat in his ceremonial robes. The throne room was more crowded than usual. Sir Richard stood at attention nearby, along with several other high-ranking officers and palace officials. Even some of the servants had found reasons to linger in the corridors outside, hoping to overhear the proceedings. "Royal Guard Marcus," the king began, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "You have served this crown with distinction for 12 years. Your record shows courage, loyalty, and unwavering dedication to your duties." Marcus's heart sank. This sounded like the beginning of a rejection speech. "However," the king continued, and Marcus felt a flicker of hope. "Times change, and perhaps our traditions must evolve as well." The room fell completely silent. Everyone strained to hear the king's next words. "After much consideration and consultation with my advisors, I have decided to grant your request for marriage. With conditions." A collective gasp echoed through the throne room. Marcus felt his knees weaken with relief, but he forced himself to remain at attention. "The conditions are these. You will continue your full duties as a royal guard. Your service record must remain exemplary. You will reside in the married quarters within the palace grounds, ensuring your availability for duty at all times. And this permission comes with the understanding that you are setting a precedent. Future requests will be judged on individual merit, but the option now exists for worthy guards who wish to marry. Marcus could barely contain his joy, but he managed to respond formally. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I accept all conditions and pledge my continued loyalty to the crown." The king smiled slightly. "There is one more condition. The wedding will take place here in the palace chapel, with the royal family in attendance. If we're going to change tradition, we might as well do it properly." This announcement sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. A royal guard marrying in the palace chapel with the king and queen present was unprecedented. It elevated what could have been a simple ceremony into a historic event. News traveled through the palace faster than wildfire. Elena was kneading dough in the kitchen when Sarah burst through the door, nearly breathless with excitement. "Elena," the king said, "yes. Marcus can marry you, and it's going to be in the royal chapel with the king and queen watching." Elena dropped her hands from the dough and stared in disbelief. "Are you certain? The whole palace is talking about it. Margaret's already started planning what foods to prepare for the celebration." Elena sank onto a nearby stool, overwhelmed by relief and joy. She had prepared herself for rejection, for the possibility of raising her child alone while Marcus chose duty over love. Instead, she was going to have the wedding of her dreams in the most beautiful chapel in the kingdom. Margaret appeared at Elena's side, flour still dusting her apron from her own baking. "Well, my dear, it looks like we have a wedding to plan." The next few days transformed the palace into a hub of unprecedented activity. The queen herself took charge of organizing the ceremony, declaring that if this was going to be the first royal guard wedding in palace history, it would be done with appropriate grandeur. "Every detail must be perfect," Queen Isabella told her ladies-in-waiting. "This young couple deserves a beautiful beginning to their marriage, and we're setting an example for future celebrations." The royal seamstresses worked around the clock to create a wedding dress for Elena. Using fine white silk and delicate lace, they crafted a gown that rivaled those worn by noble ladies. Elena stood for countless fittings, still unable to believe this was really happening. Marcus underwent his own preparations. His dress uniform was cleaned and pressed to perfection. The palace barber trimmed his hair and beard with meticulous care. Even his sword was given extra polishing until it gleamed like silver. The chapel itself received special attention. Servants cleaned every surface until it sparkled. Fresh flowers were brought in from the royal gardens, filling the sacred space with the sweet scents of roses, lilies, and jasmine. Candles were placed throughout the chapel, ready to create a warm, romantic glow for the ceremony. But the most remarkable change was in the attitudes of the palace staff. What had begun as whispered gossip had transformed into genuine excitement and celebration. Everyone wanted to be part of this historic moment. The guards, initially skeptical about their colleagues' chances, now showed new respect for Marcus's courage in challenging tradition. Several admitted privately that they, too, had harbored romantic feelings for various palace staff, but had never dared to act on them. The kitchen staff treated Elena like a princess, competing to help with wedding preparations and sharing stories of their own marriages and courtships. Even the noble ladies of the court expressed interest in attending the ceremony. "It's so romantic," gushed Lady Catherine, one of the Queen's companions. "A brave guard and a humble kitchen maid finding true love within these very walls. It's like something from a fairy tale." Lord William, despite his initial opposition to the marriage, found himself caught up in the excitement. "I admit I had my doubts," he told his brother the king. "But seeing how this has lifted everyone's spirits, perhaps you made the right decision." King Alexander nodded, watching from his window as servants hurried about their preparations with unusual enthusiasm. Sometimes taking risks brings unexpected rewards. This palace feels more alive than it has in years. The wedding was scheduled for the following Saturday, just 1 week after the king's announcement. It seemed impossible to organize such an elaborate ceremony in such a short time, but the entire palace staff worked with unprecedented cooperation and dedication. Elena could hardly sleep as the big day approached. She alternated between overwhelming joy and nervous anxiety. She was about to marry the man she loved, carry his child, and become part of the palace community permanently. But she was also about to stand before the king and queen, making vows in front of the most important people in the kingdom. Marcus experienced similar emotions. He was thrilled beyond words that his gamble had paid off, but he also felt the weight of representing all future guards who might want to marry. His wedding would be remembered in palace history. He couldn't afford for anything to go wrong. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, as if nature itself wanted to celebrate this historic day. Elena woke before sunrise, too excited and nervous to sleep any longer. In just a few hours, she would become Marcus's wife in the most magnificent ceremony she could have ever imagined. Margaret arrived early with a breakfast tray, though Elena could barely eat anything. "You need to keep your strength up, dear one," the older woman said gently. "It's going to be a long, wonderful day." The Queen's ladies-in-waiting came to help Elena prepare. They had never dressed a kitchen maid before, but they treated Elena with the same care and attention they would give to any noble bride. They helped her bathe in rose-scented water, arranged her hair in an elaborate style with tiny white flowers, and carefully assisted her into the beautiful silk gown. When Elena looked at herself in the mirror, she gasped. The woman staring back at her looked like a princess from a storybook. The dress fit perfectly, the neckline modest but elegant, the skirt flowing like water with each movement. She had never imagined she could look so beautiful. "Every bride should feel this special on her wedding day," said Lady Margaret, the Queen's chief lady-in-waiting, as she placed a delicate veil on Elena's head. "You look absolutely radiant, my dear." Meanwhile, Marcus was undergoing his own preparations in the guards' quarters. His fellow guards had gathered to help him dress and offer their congratulations. The atmosphere was festive, with jokes and laughter mixed with genuine good wishes. "You've got courage, I'll give you that," said Thomas, one of the senior guards. "Most of us have just admired the ladies from afar. You actually did something about it." Sir Richard appeared to inspect Marcus's appearance. The young guard looked magnificent in his dress uniform, every button polished, every crease perfect. "You look worthy of standing before the king," Sir Richard declared with approval. But Marcus felt more nervous than he had before any battle or dangerous mission. "What if I say something wrong during the ceremony? What if I trip walking down the aisle?" "You won't," Sir Richard assured him. "You're one of the most composed men I know. Just remember why you're doing this and let that guide you." The palace chapel had been transformed into something magical. Hundreds of candles cast a warm, golden glow throughout the space. Fresh flowers adorned every surface, their sweet fragrance filling the air. The wooden pews, normally used only for daily prayers, now gleamed from careful polishing. Guests began arriving an hour before the ceremony. The front pews were reserved for the royal family and high-ranking nobles, but the back sections filled with palace staff who had received special permission to attend. Cooks, stable boys, seamstresses, gardeners, and servants of every level came dressed in their finest clothes to witness this unprecedented event. The guards not on active duty formed an honor guard along the aisle, their swords raised to create an archway through which the bride and groom would walk. Even visiting nobles and foreign diplomats had requested permission to observe this historic ceremony. King Alexander and Queen Isabella entered together, wearing their formal court attire but with expressions of genuine warmth and happiness. The Queen had insisted on attending, declaring that any wedding blessed by the crown deserved royal presence. "I've never seen the palace so excited about anything," the Queen whispered to her husband as they took their seats in the front pew. "Look at all these happy faces. This marriage has brought everyone together in a way I never expected." Father Benedict, the palace chaplain, took his place at the altar. He had performed countless royal ceremonies over the years, but never one quite like this. A common kitchen maid marrying a royal guard in the presence of the king and queen was something he would remember for the rest of his life. The moment arrived for the ceremony to begin. Marcus walked down the aisle first, flanked by Sir Richard and Thomas as his attendants. He looked straight ahead toward the altar, trying to control his racing heart. The sight of so many people gathered to witness his wedding was almost overwhelming. When Marcus reached the altar and turned to face the congregation, the chapel doors opened again. Elena appeared, escorted by Margaret, who had gladly agreed to stand in place of the father Elena had lost to illness years before. A collective gasp of admiration rose from the assembled guests. Elena looked absolutely stunning in her white silk gown, the veil flowing behind her like clouds. She moved with grace and dignity, her eyes fixed on Marcus waiting at the altar. Marcus felt tears of joy spring to his eyes as he watched his bride approach. He had dreamed of this moment for months, but the reality exceeded every fantasy. Elena looked like an angel walking toward him through the candlelit chapel. As Elena drew near, Marcus stepped forward to take her hand. The touch of her fingers sent warmth through his entire body. They had made it through all the uncertainty and fear. They were really going to be married. Father Benedict began the ancient ceremony with words that had united countless couples over the centuries. But everyone present knew they were witnessing something unique, a moment that would be talked about in palace corridors for generations to come. "Dearly beloved," Father Benedict intoned, his voice carrying clearly through the chapel, "we are gathered here in the sight of God, and in the presence of these witnesses to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The familiar words took on special meaning in this extraordinary setting. Marcus and Elena had overcome class differences, royal protocol, and ancient traditions to reach this moment. Their love had literally changed the law of the land. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God, the chaplain continued. Elena felt a wave of emotion wash over her, standing here in this magnificent chapel, surrounded by people who had become her family, preparing to marry the man she loved beyond words. She felt blessed beyond measure. The frightened girl who had arrived at the palace 3 years ago could never have imagined such happiness was possible. When Father Benedict asked who gave the bride in marriage, Margaret stepped forward proudly. "I do on behalf of all who love her," she declared, her voice strong despite the tears in her eyes. The exchange of vows began, each word carrying extra weight because of everything Marcus and Elena had risked to reach this moment. When Marcus promised to love and cherish Elena in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, everyone present knew he had already proven those words through his actions. Elena's voice was clear and strong as she made her own promises, her eyes never leaving Marcus's face. She pledged her love and loyalty not just to her husband, but by extension to the royal family and the kingdom that had given them this chance. The rings, simple gold bands provided by the queen herself, were blessed and exchanged. As Marcus slipped the ring onto Elena's finger, she felt the final piece of their new life together fall into place. Father Benedict raised his hands for the final blessing. "By the power vested in me by God and by His Majesty the King, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Marcus, you may kiss your bride." The chapel erupted in joyous celebration as Marcus and Elena shared their first kiss as married couple. Cheers and applause echoed off the stone walls, a sound of pure happiness that seemed to lift the very roof. Even the normally reserved nobles were clapping enthusiastically. King Alexander stood and raised his hand for silence. The chapel immediately quieted, everyone eager to hear what their monarch would say about this historic moment. "Today we have witnessed something beautiful and unprecedented," the king began, his voice carrying clearly through the space. "Marcus and Elena, your courage to follow your hearts has not only brought you happiness, but has opened new possibilities for others who serve this crown. May your marriage be blessed with love, loyalty, and the kind of partnership that makes both individuals stronger." The queen rose gracefully beside her husband. "As a wedding gift from the crown, you will receive a cottage on the palace grounds, fully furnished for your new life together. May it be filled with laughter, love, and the patter of little feet." Elena felt tears of gratitude streaming down her cheeks. The royal family had not just permitted their marriage, they were actively celebrating and supporting it. She had found not just a husband, but a true home and family. As the newlyweds walked back down the aisle, the honor guard of Marcus's fellow guards raised their swords high, creating a glittering canopy of steel above the couple. Rose petals rained down from the balcony where the younger palace staff had gathered, creating a fragrant carpet beneath their feet. The celebration moved to the great hall, which had been decorated with flowers and ribbons for the wedding feast. Long tables groaned under the weight of elaborate dishes prepared by the kitchen staff, who had outdone themselves for their beloved Elena's special day. Margaret had organized the most magnificent wedding cake anyone had ever seen at the palace. 3 tiers of delicate sponge cake with sweet cream and fresh berries, decorated with sugar flowers that looked real enough to pick from a garden. "I've been planning this cake since the day I first saw you two making eyes at each other," Margaret confessed to Elena with a wink. "I knew it would happen eventually." The great hall buzzed with conversation and laughter as guests shared the feast and toasted the happy couple. Lords and ladies sat beside kitchen maids and stable boys, all united in celebrating this extraordinary day. The usual rigid class divisions seemed to dissolve in the face of such overwhelming joy. Sir Richard stood to offer a toast. "To Marcus and Elena, who have shown us that true love can overcome any obstacle. May their courage inspire us all to follow our hearts while never forgetting our duties. Glass after glass was raised in honor of the newlyweds. Even visiting dignitaries from neighboring kingdoms joined the celebration, amazed by this display of royal generosity and acceptance of change. As the evening progressed, musicians filled the hall with festive melodies. Dancing began with Marcus and Elena sharing the first dance as husband and wife. They moved together perfectly, lost in each other's eyes, seeming to float across the polished floor. "I can't believe this is real," Elena whispered to Marcus as they danced. "This morning I was a kitchen maid, and now I'm dancing in the great hall as your wife." "You were never just a kitchen maid to me," Marcus replied, spinning her gently. "From the first moment I saw you, I knew you were meant for something special." Other couples joined the dancing, creating a whirling kaleidoscope of colorful gowns and dress uniforms. The queen herself took the floor with the king, their graceful movements inspiring others to follow their example. Young Thomas, one of Marcus's fellow guards, finally worked up the courage to ask Sarah from the kitchen staff to dance. They had been admiring each other from afar for months, and Marcus's successful courtship had given Thomas hope that he, too, might find love within these palace walls. "Perhaps I should speak to the king as well," Thomas confided to Marcus during a break in the festivities. "If it worked for you, maybe there's hope for the rest of us." Marcus laughed and clapped his friend on the shoulder. "Just make sure you're as certain about your feelings as I was about mine. The king doesn't grant these permissions lightly." As the night wore on, more palace romances seemed to blossom in the magical atmosphere of acceptance and celebration. Guards danced with maids, stable boys gathered courage to speak to seamstresses, and even some of the younger nobles showed interest in palace staff they had previously overlooked. The queen observed these developments with satisfaction. "Alexander, I think this wedding has done more than just unite two people in marriage. It's brought our entire palace community closer together." The king nodded, watching the diverse crowd celebrating as one large family. Perhaps breaking tradition wasn't such a dangerous idea after all. "Look how happy everyone is tonight." Near midnight, as the celebration began to wind down, Marcus and Elena prepared to leave for their new cottage. The king and queen had insisted on giving them privacy for their wedding night, with Marcus excused from guard duty until the following afternoon. The cottage was small but perfect, with whitewashed walls, diamond-paned windows, and a garden already planted with herbs and flowers. Inside they found beautiful furniture, soft linens, and even a cradle tucked into the corner of the bedroom for their expected child. "The queen thought of everything," Elena marveled, running her fingers over the smooth wood of the cradle. "Our baby will be so fortunate to grow up here." Marcus pulled his wife close, still amazed that he could call her that. "Our child will grow up knowing that love can overcome any obstacle, that courage can change the world, and that sometimes the greatest risk brings the greatest reward." They stood together in their new home, looking out the window at the palace that had brought them together and would shelter their growing family. The lights in the great hall were finally dimming as the last guests made their way to their own quarters. But the warm glow of celebration seemed to linger in the air. Elena placed her hand on her still flat stomach, thinking of the new life growing within her. Their child would be born into a world where love had triumphed over tradition, where a kitchen maid could marry a royal guard with the blessing of the crown itself. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked, noticing her distant expression. "I'm thinking about how this all started with a dropped tray of bread," Elena replied with a smile. "If I hadn't stumbled on those steps, we might never have spoken to each other." Marcus laughed and spun her around their cozy sitting room. "Then let's always be grateful for that clumsy moment. It changed both our lives forever." Outside their window, the palace settled into peaceful quiet. Guards took their positions for the night watch, servants cleaned up the remnants of the celebration, and normal routines slowly resumed. But something fundamental had shifted in the very atmosphere of the place. Love had been officially recognized and celebrated within these ancient walls, opening doors that had been locked for centuries. 6 months after their wedding, Marcus and Elena had settled into a rhythm of married life that seemed to work perfectly for everyone involved. Elena continued working in the kitchens, though with lighter duties due to her pregnancy. Marcus maintained his position as one of the king's most trusted guards. his dedication to duty unchanged by his new marital status. The cottage had become a gathering place for other palace staff during their free time. Elena's natural warmth and Marcus's steady friendship drew people to their home like flowers turning toward the sun. On Sunday afternoons, their small garden would fill with guards, kitchen maids, stable boys, and even some of the younger nobles, all sharing stories and laughter. The most remarkable change, however, was in the palace's social atmosphere. Marcus and Elena's successful marriage had inspired others to be more open about their own feelings. 3 more guards had requested permission to marry palace staff, and the king had granted 2 of those requests after careful consideration. Thomas had indeed married Sarah, from the kitchen staff in a smaller but equally joyful ceremony 2 months after Marcus and Elena's wedding. The young couple had chosen to have their celebration in the palace gardens, with Elena organizing the food and decorations with the same care that had been shown for her own special day. It's become quite fashionable to marry for love within these walls, Queen Isabella remarked to her husband as they watched yet another palace courtship blossoming in their courtyard below. I never expected such a romantic transformation. King Alexander smiled as he observed his guards and staff interacting with newfound openness and happiness. The palace feels more alive than it has in decades. Perhaps we were wrong to suppress these natural human connections for so long. Word of the royal guard's wedding had spread beyond the palace walls, reaching other kingdoms and courts throughout the region. Visiting diplomats often asked to hear the story firsthand, amazed that a monarch would change ancient laws to accommodate true love. Lord William, despite his initial opposition, had become one of the most vocal supporters of the new policy. I must admit I was wrong, he told his brother the king during one of their regular strategy meetings. The guards who have married seem more motivated, not less. They have something precious to protect, which makes them fight harder for the kingdom's safety. Elena's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and she became something of a celebrity throughout the palace. Everyone wanted to offer advice, gifts, or assistance to the brave woman whose love had changed their world. The royal physicians attended her regularly, ensuring both mother and child remained healthy. Your baby will be the most spoiled child in the kingdom, Margaret teased Elena one afternoon as they worked together in the kitchen. Half the palace is already making toys and clothes for the little one. Elena laughed, her hand resting on her rounded belly. I just hope our child understands how blessed they are to grow up here, surrounded by so much love and acceptance. Marcus had thrown himself into preparing for fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to his guard duties. He studied books about child rearing, consulted with other fathers in the palace, and even began learning carpentry skills to make furniture for their growing family. You're going to be an excellent father, Sir Richard observed as he watched Marcus carefully sanding a small wooden horse he had carved for his unborn child. Your child will learn both strength and gentleness from your example. The autumn brought exciting news from neighboring kingdoms. 3 different royal courts had modified their own marriage laws for palace staff, inspired by King Alexander's precedent. Letters arrived regularly from guards and servants in distant castles, thanking Marcus and Elena for showing that change was possible. We've started something bigger than we realized, Elena said one evening, as she and Marcus read through the latest correspondence. Our love story is helping people everywhere find their own happiness. Marcus marveled at how far their influence had reached. When I first asked the king for permission to marry you, I never imagined it would affect so many others. I just knew I couldn't live without you. The most touching letter came from a young guard in the northern kingdom who had been inspired to court a seamstress after hearing their story. He wrote that their courage had given him hope that love could overcome any obstacle, and he planned to request permission for his own marriage after completing his current tour of duty. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the palace grounds in pristine snow. Elena's due date approached, and excitement throughout the palace reached fever pitch. Everyone had opinions about whether the baby would be a boy or girl, what names should be chosen, and how the child should be raised. The king and queen had insisted on providing the finest care for Elena's delivery. The royal physicians prepared thoroughly, while the palace staff organized themselves to ensure smooth operations during the birth. On a crisp December morning, Elena went into labor. Marcus paced anxiously outside their cottage while Margaret and the royal physician attended to his wife. The entire palace seemed to hold its breath, waiting for news of their beloved couple's first child. Hours later, the cry of a healthy baby filled the winter air. Margaret emerged from the cottage with tears of joy streaming down her weathered face. "It's a beautiful daughter," she announced to Marcus, who nearly collapsed with relief and happiness. "Both mother and child are perfect." News of the birth spread through the palace faster than wildfire. Guards abandoned their posts to congratulate their colleague. Kitchen staff prepared celebratory feasts, and even visiting nobles sent gifts and well wishes. King Alexander and Queen Isabella visited the new family that very afternoon, bringing official recognition of the child's place in palace history. "Little Catherine will always hold a special place in this kingdom," the Queen declared, gently holding the tiny baby. "She represents hope, change, and the power of love to transform our world." Marcus gazed at his wife and daughter with overwhelming gratitude. Elena looked radiant despite her exhaustion, cradling their child with the same grace she brought to everything else in her life. "What do you think she'll become when she grows up?" Elena asked softly, studying their daughter's perfect features. "Whatever she chooses," Marcus replied firmly. "In this palace, under this king's rule, she can follow her dreams just as we did. She'll grow up knowing that love and courage can overcome any obstacle." As spring returned to the palace grounds, baby Catherine became the unofficial mascot of the entire staff. Guards would stop by the cottage to play with her during their breaks. Kitchen maids competed to help with her care. Even the horses in the royal stables seemed to gentle when she was near. The first anniversary of Marcus and Elena's wedding was celebrated throughout the palace with the same enthusiasm as a national holiday. The king declared it an official day of recognition for all palace marriages, creating a new tradition that would continue for generations. "1 year ago, you two changed everything," Sir Richard said during the anniversary celebration. "You proved that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is follow their heart." Elena looked around at all the happy faces surrounding them, many belonging to couples whose own romances had been inspired by their example. Thomas and Sarah were expecting their first child. 2 more guard staff marriages were planned for the summer. The palace had truly become a place where love could flourish. "I never imagined our wedding would have such far-reaching effects," Elena mused to Marcus as they danced together in the same great hall where they had celebrated a year before. "Neither did I," Marcus admitted, spinning his wife gently around the polished floor. "But I'm grateful for every moment, every challenge, and every blessing that brought us here." Little Catherine slept peacefully in the Queen's arms as her parents danced, surrounded by the palace family that had embraced and supported them from the very beginning. The baby would grow up in a world where love had triumphed over tradition, where courage had opened doors that seemed permanently sealed, and where a simple kitchen maid and a loyal royal guard had changed the course of history through the power of their devotion to each other. The royal guard's wedding had indeed stirred the entire palace, leaving everyone in disbelief at first, but ultimately bringing a joy and hope that would resonate through the castle walls for generations to come. Their love story had become legend, proof that sometimes the most unlikely dreams can come true when 2 hearts refuse to give up on each other.